So in this sub-lesson, we're going to be using AWS CloudFormation. So CloudFormation can automate the provisioning of all your AWS resources. Using YAML for all the and so at its simplest, it's a stack. The stack is a set of resources that are created within this template. And then the resulting stack represents a group of resources whose life cycles are inherently linked. And so you'll see examples of the different components, and that's what we'll be going through in the sub-lesson. So I have a few links. I'm just going to talk through that. And so there are within a CloudFormation template. The format version, which is just the version of the API for CloudFormation that will be the purpose of that template is. You can provide parameters to the template which how that stack might be used, whether it's a port number, it's username, it could be a branch, it could be a number of things where you want to customize how that stack gets created. Resources are the key construct, and in fact, it's the only construct, the only object that's required in a CloudFormation. Things like you're creating an EC2 instance, or creating, in our example, we'll be creating a code pipeline, we'll be creating rules, or CloudWatch event rules, Lambda, and things like that. So we're resources. Then you have mappings. Mappings are, you can kind of look at mappings as a switch to run. You can use mappings along with conditions. And then you have outputs. Outputs are information that they can use, say like a URL, Amazon resource. Any kind of information that you want an empty template. So you have the AWS template format version. You're going to put the format version date. You're going to see the same one in most CloudFormation templates. It hasn't changed. Here you're going to define a description, and this is YAML based. You have a description, you put a string into that. You might have things like metadata that you provide to it, parameters, the mappings, conditions, transforms, and then the key construct you're going to see, as I mentioned, in all CloudFormation templates, you're going to see at least one resource that gets defined, and then you have outputs. So let's have an example of a template that uses some of these different objects. And so here we have the AWS template format version. We have 2010-9.9 that we're providing to it. We have a description. We're mentioning that this template creates one or more Amazon resources, so you would configure that to whatever the purpose of your template is. You have metadata that you can pass to it. In this example, I'm using a CloudFormation interface, and this allows me to customize how the parameters are shown. And so, for example, how the actual name of the parameter can get displayed in a different format to the actual parameter itself. And it just allows you to customize the behavior, make it a little more user-friendly for the people that are going to be using your CloudFormation template. And then here we can pass in parameters. So we just define the parameter top-level object, and then we have the different logical names. We can provide defaults to the parameters. So the default is 3306. We have a description. We can also put constraints associated with the parameter. So we can have a minimum value, a maximum value, or only certain characters can be passed into the parameter, things like that. And then you'll see another parameter. the one key thing to note here is you have a no echo. So you can put no echo to true, which means you're not going to see the value. So in the case of a password, you don't want to see the value of that, so you just put no echo on. So here we have mappings. This is an example. Amazon machine images, or AMIs, AMI IDs that we're passing to it. So in US East 1, we're going to use this specific AMI. On your CloudFormation template. So it gives you some flexibility environments. And then we have a transform object. We're going to be using this in one of the later lessons in this course. And so we use a transform object. And we can just identify what that transform is. And in this case, we have some serverless macros that we're going to be using. Not a lot to know there, just to know that we're going to be using that at some point. Really, the key part to know is resources. So here I have the resources object. I have a logical name. I've called it my instance. I give it a type. And so I can actually look this type up right now. I can see I have an EC2 instance. You can see an example of that. The properties that are associated with that. And so I can define how this EC2 instance template as a part of that stack that I launch. I can see how I can, which properties I can pass to it and how to use that particular resource. So in this case, I just have a couple of properties that I'm passing into it. In the example, I that I'll be passing to it. The other resource I'm using here, so I have two resources. CloudFormation template might have 15 to 20 resources that I might be using. And so in this case, I have a queue. Again, you see a very similar kind of name. CloudFormation resource name. So it's AWS, 2 colons, the name of the service, and then the name of the component, the feature that we're using. So lastly, we have outputs. Outputs allow us to display information to the end user that they might need, maybe a resource name that gets generated. The VPC ID, it makes a reference to it. That's a common nomenclature you're going to see as a reference to an object, a logical object that's being referred to throughout the template. We can provide a description. We can export that information that we can use in other templates as well. But really the kind of the key thing to note is that you can in the CloudFormation console, or you can run it through the CLI as well. And it's just useful information that others are going to need or other templates might need. So let's have a look at a simple CloudFormation template. And so we have the template version, we have the description, we have the resources. We're going to name it my queue. We're using SQSQ. And then we have a property called a queue name. And in that queue name, we're going to be using what's known as an intrinsic function. We'll be using this throughout the course. You'll see examples of it. In this case, we're using fn join. Unique name. So I have a sample queue, and then I'm concatenating that with but a pseudo parameter is something that's predefined by CloudFormation that you don't declare in the template. but you have access to those. And so in this case, I'm using an AWS stack name, and that stack name allows each queue has to have a unique name. And then I have an output, and with the queue, but I could list as many outputs as I wanted, based on what's necessary for the end user. So let's take a look at a couple intrinsic functions. For the most part, you're going to be launching these CloudFormation stacks based on code that I'm providing as a part of this course, but just to be aware of some of the different components that you're looking at if you aren't familiar with CloudFormation. So we have these pseudo parameters, and as I mentioned, these are provided by CloudFormation, but you don't have to declare them. And so in the template, so you have things like to automatically generate a resource name or get access to a resource that's been generated already. Notification ARNs, you can use no value. The region, that's a pretty common one. So you'll see in this course, you'll be seeing AWS region I'll be using, AWS stack name, and then AWS account ID. You'll see that in some of the examples as well. So pretty much you just make a reference to it as it shows here, and then it uses. The other thing I want to look at is intrinsic functions. And so these functions in your CloudFormation templates. And so probably the most common one you're going to see is the ref function. And a ref function, it returns whatever that resource is. And so if you have created a resource in your CloudFormation template and you want to make a reference to it, then you just use the you can see there's lots of other functions that are provided as well. We just saw an example of the FN join. FN or something like that, then you know that it's one of these intrinsic functions that you can use in CloudFormation. I'm going to start with the CLI, and this is something that's already been running AWS CloudFormation, and then we're going to run create stack. We're going to provide it region. We're going to provide another parameter URL, and so we're providing in this case a publicly accessible URL, and it refers to this particular CloudFormation template. And then I'm providing any capabilities that it might need. In this case, if it needs identity and access management, I'm passing that to the call that I'm making. So we'll go back to our IDE. And you can see that it's generated the stack. It's generated a stack ID that's associated to that. And I can see that this stack is being generated. I can also check that through the CLI as well. And so what this returns is actually the output that it generated. So if I look at the CloudFormation console, and I click on the stack, and I go to the outputs, I can see that resource name associated with this SQSQ. And clicking, I can go to SQS, simple queue service. I could create a new queue or FIFO queue. I configure the queue. I can go through all these settings. I could go through the console, right? That's a way of doing this. But if you're able to define all the now it's source code. It's configuration code that you can version into a code commit repository, any kind of Git repository, and then you can make that a part of a continuous delivery workflow. So you get all the benefits that you would have. You can test it. You can run it as part of a continuous process instead of clicking through all the different items. And you can start to treat this as a software asset, just the way you do with application code and other assets as well. So you're treating your infrastructure as code. So let's do something similar by going to the AWS console. And so we'll click on the console, and then we're going to, I'm just going to copy the S3 field here. So I'm going to click on Create Stack. I'll scroll down to the Amazon S3 URL and specify template. I'll paste that. I'm going to give it a unique name. It just needs to be unique for the particular AWS region that I'm in. I'll click Next. I could put tags. I could assign permissions. There's some advanced options with stack policy and rollbacks and things like that. I'm just going to click on Next. I can review it. I can see the template. It into a stack, and actually as part of that, it's creating the resource of that S3 URL. Okay, so the stack is created. Again, it's very similar to the one that we created before. The source queue, it's based on the same source code, but this is just another way that you can run the same. You can launch the same CloudFormation stack. You can do it through CLI. You can do it through the console. So just like you can run CloudFormation from the CLI and from the console, you can actually also run it from an SDK. And so AWS provides software development kits for common programming languages like Go, Python, Java, and the Node.js SDK. And so here's an example of using Node.js to launch a CloudFormation stack. And so we define a variable, AWS, we get the AWS. And then we instantiate a CloudFormation object, pass in some parameters right from Node.js. So we can use an imperative language and along with the CLI and the console. As code, and therefore you're able to treat it like a software asset, just like the rest of your application. You can provision it as a part of a continuous delivery pipeline that gets deployed to production. And because it's a declarative model, you can repeatably and safely deploy changes as a part of a single source of your code commit repository. So you're able to model multiple components of your infrastructure as a single unit, as its own life cycle, and you're able to define this software system. So CloudFormation documentation, you're going to be referring to CloudFormation documentation all of the time. It doesn't matter if you've been using it. You're always referring to the documentation. So use these throughout the course, but also as you start to use CloudFormation if you haven't used it already. One of the first links is pretty interesting, and that is, and not a lot of people know that this exists, but the AWS Documentation Hub. And you're able to access all the AWS documentation through the Documentation Hub. So every single AWS service has extensive documentation associated with it. So I can type in CloudFormation, I can get direct, or we're going to go directly to the CloudFormation documentation as well from here. And so there's a user guide, there's an API reference, there's also the CLI documentation. So any of the commands that we've been running already, you can see. I can go to create stack, for example, and I can see an example of how I might run that. And so this comes in really handy as you start to use CloudFormation, as you start to use really any of your AWS resources. As well. You can see if I want to delete a stack, I can do all these types of activities through the command line. You can actually download this on Amazon.com as well. So you can download this onto your Kindle as an example, and you can read through the documentation. And then there's the AWS resource and property types reference. This is the most frequented area that I go to when I'm using AWS CloudFormation, because what it gives me are the service resource types, and so you can see all the different services that CloudFormation provides. Use CoPipeline, and I want to use the pipeline resource. I can see all the ways that I can use that. I can see the properties that are associated with that. And then I can see examples on how to use it, whether it's required, if there are certain data types that it uses. I can go into the data types and learn more about that. And so this becomes we have the API reference, the CLI reference I've already gone over. And so this is an area called AWS Solutions that have end-to-end solutions using CloudFormation based on a use case. So it gets into something very specific. Solution, and you can look through how those solutions have been developed. So if you want to learn more about sort of best practices in terms of how AWS uses CloudFormation for its various solutions, or you have certain use cases that you want to use CloudFormation with, you can look at area on AWS, and you can search for based on technology category. If you're using containers, or you're using the developer tools, you can select those, and I can look at, say, develop a validation pipeline, AWS CloudFormation validation pipeline, which so I can look at a deployment guide. I can look over the solution. Always gives an architecture associated with it, or with all the various I can launch the solution. So I can directly from the AWS Solutions area, I can launch a CloudFormation template. I can create the stack as a part of the process. I can look through the details of the deployment guide as well. So I can download that from here. And so there's a lot of useful information that you're able to use for when you're using AWS CloudFormation. A couple others to keep in mind are AWS Quick Starts. So kind of similar, but these are quick starts around specific deployments that you might want to operate. And so, but it has different examples within the quick starts as well. And then AWS AWS developer tools, but it puts together a continuous delivery solution that uses CloudFormation, uses things like code commit, code pipeline. CloudFormation template. So we've been using what's already stored in S3, both from the CLI and the console. So now we're going to actually create it in our own environment. And so we're going again. And we're going to CD to the CCOA. We're already there, but just to make sure, we're going to essentially we're going to create a new file called CCOA-1 CFN YAML. And this is that same CloudFormation template that you've seen examples of already, but we're going to actually run that. And so we copied in, we're going to save it. And so you can see the versus the outputs and so on. And now we're going to launch that directly from the console. But the way we're going to do this is we're going to sync it with that S3 bucket that we had previously created when we set up our development environment. So we're going to take this command, go back to our IDE, and here we're syncing all those changes. We're going to click Create Stack. Okay, and then we're going to pass in this URL. So instead of my bucket, this is mentioned in the instructions. Instead of my bucket, we're going to replace this with the S3 bucket that we had created when we set up our development environment. So this is the name of that. And so we're just going to get that name. So this is CCO. Go to this full URL, which is uploaded into actually a private bucket, but we're able to refer to that within our AWS account. Box, click Next. We're going to give it a name. Click Next. And now we're going to review it. The file itself. So if we go into this bucket, we should see some of the files. So this is the file that we just synced up with using that CLI command. So then we can go back to Cloud that we saw in the previous sections. You can download the file from the resources section. If you want to, you can clean up any resources if you're taking a break or you're coming back at some other point, but you can go through the cleanup at that point. Otherwise, we're going to move on to the next lesson.